What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Wolfcryer here, and welcome to another Diablo 3 Basics video, my video series which tries to enlighten new players, returning players, and veterans alike. And today's video is going to be all about legendary gems. We're going to talk about the roles that legendary gems play in different builds. We're going to talk about leveling up those legendary gems and tips for using them to augment your gear to give you even more power. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about the gems themselves. Every time you complete a greater rift, you are rewarded with a legendary gem, and you can only hold one of these legendary gems at a time. However, you can actually accumulate more than one gem simply by taking that gem, throwing it on the ground. It's no longer in your inventory or your stash, and running another GR, and that will give you a duplicate of that gem. Just a little tip there in case you notice that your favorite streamer or whatever has a ton of one kind of gem. That's how they get them. They throw them on the ground, they run GRs, and they accumulate a ton of them, and they use them usually for augmenting their gear, their ancient items, if you will. So there's that. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the gems, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk about these in tiers for the most part because some gems are way better than others and some are pretty necessary for most builds. One of which, probably the most important gem in the game, is the Bane of the Trapped. This is a huge damage boost for every single build in the game for the most part because this is a multiplicative, meaning it takes your damage and multiplies it by this number and gives you that bonus damage. So the Bane of the Trap gem gives you added damage against enemies affected by control impairing effect. This means freezes, stuns, slows. Anytime a enemy's movement is slowed down or stopped, you gain this effect. And each of these gems at level 25 gives you a bonus stat as well. So at level 25, the Bane of the Trap gives you an aura that slows down enemy movement around you, allowing you to gain the full effect of this gem. Now, other things such as stuns you deal or freezes that you deal towards the enemies also benefit this gem. Very, very useful and used in almost all damage dealing or DPS builds in Diablo 3. Next up, we have Bane of the Stricken. This is strictly meant for killing the Rift Guardians, especially as you gain GR levels. The Rift Guardian becomes harder and harder to kill, strictly due to his health pool. Now, this one allows for each attack you make against that Rift Guardian deals more and more damage repetitively. Very useful in solo play as well as during group play. One person will wear a Stricken and they will be the Rift Guardian killer. There are certain roles out there for that specific purpose, and they almost always wear a Bane of the Stricken. Now at level 25, this gives you a 25% damage increase against bosses and Rift Guardians. So another very useful gem, especially for solo play. If you're going to be pushing greater rifts, you want to have a Bane of the Stricken and a Bane of the Trapped. The next gems are all situational based on your build. And we're going to start off with Zaze. This is for ranged casters. Damage you deal is increased by a certain percentage for every 10 yards between you and the enemies you hit, with a maximum increase at 50 yards. And at 25, this gives you a 20% chance on hit to stun the enemy for 1 second. This will proc your Bane of the Trapped if you're wearing one as well. So this is meant for ranged casters or Wave of Light monks or wizards, stuff like that. If you're going to be far away from the enemies, you want to be using a Zaze Stone of Vengeance. That's going to increase your damage significantly. Next up, we have Simplicity Strength. There's not a lot of builds out there that use this. I know that the Raiment Generator build for the Monk class uses this. Anytime you are using your primary abilities to deal the bulk of your damage, this gem comes in very handy. It increases the damage of your primary skills, and at 25, hits with your primary abilities heal you for 4% of your health. Very useful gem, but very limited in action due to the small amount of builds that utilize primary skills as their main source of damage. Then we've got the Teguk gem, and this one is for channeling abilities. Channeling abilities could be Tempest Rush for the Monk, Whirlwind for the Barbarian, Fire Bats, and this gives a massive damage boost because it stacks up to 10 times as you're channeling. When you stop channeling, this falls off and you no longer deal that damage, but for 1.5 seconds while you are channeling, you gain this damage bonus, and you also at rank 25 gain 2% increased armor for every stack, so up to 20% increased armor. Then we're looking at Enforcer. This is your pet gem. This increases the damage of your pets by a certain percentage, and your pets take 90% less damage when this is rank 25. Now this is only for builds that utilize your pets as your main source of damage. If they are only secondary, you probably don't want to be using an Enforcer. You want to use a gem that helps out your build and helps the skill that is dealing the most damage. But certain Witch Doctor builds, Necromancer builds, this gem comes in wicked handy and causes your minions to deal a ton of damage. Then we've got Pain Enhancer. Primarily, Pain Enhancer is useful in groups. There's not a lot of solo builds out there that use Pain Enhancer. Critical hits cause the enemy to bleed for a certain amount of damage as physical over 3 seconds, and at 25 you gain Blood Frenzy, which gives you 3% increased attack speed for every bleeding enemy within 20 yards. This is very helpful as the trash clear in Greater Rifts for group play. It doesn't usually give a lot of good bonus for solo play because there's other gems out there that will give you a lot more damage than the Pain Enhancer. Then we've got Boyarski's Chip. This is very situational. This is only for Thorns builds. If Thorns is your main source of damage, this is the gem you want to have. This adds Thorns damage, and at level 25, it taunts the first enemy hit by your primary skills for 2 seconds, causing them to attack you, allowing you to deal your Thorns damage to it. But there are not a lot of Thorns builds out there. I think Barb, Crusader, and Necromancers are the only ones out there with any viable Thorns builds. But overall, for the most part, Thorns builds aren't really the thing right now, with the exception of 1 or 2 standouts. Then we've got Gogok of Swiftness. With this gem, you gain Swiftness with every attack, increasing your attack speed by 1% and your dodge chance by a certain percentage for 4 seconds. And this effect stacks up to 15 times, so you get up to 15% increased attack speed. And at rank 25, you gain 1% cooldown reduction per stack of Swiftness, allowing you to gain up to 15% increased cooldown reduction, which can be very helpful for builds like Uliana's Exploding Palm, certain wizard builds, etc. It's also very useful on support monks or ZDPS monks or barbs because cooldown helps them out greatly. Then we've got Esoteric Alteration. This is a defensive gem and very useful at mitigating non-physical damage because you gain a certain percentage of non-physical damage reduction for every level, and at rank 25, while you are below 50% life, your resistances to cold, fire, lightning, poison, and arcane are increased by 75%. Very useful on ZDPS builds. Some builds out there for damage dealers also utilize this gem, but they are very few and far between. But I would say if you are struggling with certain content, this can be a very useful gem as well. Then we've got Mutilation Guard. This gem is not used that much. You gain a certain amount of melee damage reduction, and at rank 25, while you are below 50% life, you may move unhindered through enemies, so you can walk right through them like they were not even there. Now, this has been used in certain DPS builds during group play, like Wizards in the past, where they are able to walk through enemies and just keep going, but this gem is not normally used in many builds. Then we've got Gem of Efficacious Toxin. This is primarily for a ZDPS or support character, such as a Z-Barb or Z-Monk. These builds don't deal any damage, and they are only meant to augment the group and help them out. So this allows you to poison enemies you hit for a certain amount of weapon damage over 10 seconds, but the primary thing that people are using it for is all enemies you poison take 10% increased damage from all sources and deal 10% less damage. So it brings a big buff to the group play, so that's why it's primarily used on ZDPS builds. There are so many better gems out there that you can use for your DPS builds or your solo builds where this is not viable outside of a group for the most part. Then we've got Ice Blink, another support gem. Your cold skills now apply chill effects, and your chill effects now slow enemy movement for an additional certain percent. Now at 25, enemies you chill have a 10% increased chance to be critically hit. This sounds very awesome, and it is in group play, but for solo play, I would leave this gem alone. This is primarily meant for ZDPS characters in group play, especially if you're pushing higher GRs, etc. This is going to allow a buff for the whole party, just like Effication does. These two gems are used primarily for ZDPS characters. Then we've got Gem of Ease, which can be very helpful, especially on a ZDPS character in a group. You can be leveling pretty quick. Monster kills grant extra experience, and at 25, level requirement of the item this gem is socketed into is set to 1. So this gem is only used for leveling. So whether that be on a ZDPS character, if you got a spot for a Gem of Ease, or if you are leveling a level 1 character by yourself or in a group, if you're getting power leveled, it's always good to throw a Gem of Ease on, because this is going to help you out greatly in that aspect and allow you to gain experience much faster. Then we've got Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. Regenerates a certain amount of life per second, and at 25, after not taking damage for 4 seconds, you gain a Absorb Shield for 200% of your total life per second. Now this gem is handy for some builds, but it's very, very rare and very situational. It's not a gem that most people utilize because there's so many other better gems out there for you. Then we've got Bane of the Powerful. This can be useful in farming builds where you don't need a stricken and you want a third damage dealing gem. Gain 20% increased damage for a certain amount of time after killing an elite pack, and you gain 15% increased damage versus elites and take 15% reduced damage from elites at rank 25. So this is very useful for farming. Like I said, if you do not need a stricken and you want another damage dealing gem in your setup, Bane of the Powerful is very useful for that. It is not useful in pushing greater rifts because you are not going to be killing elites fast enough to gain the effects of this gem that often. Then we've got Wreath of Lightning. You have a 15% chance on hit to gain Wreath of Lightning, dealing a certain amount of weapon damage as lightning every second to nearby enemies for 3 seconds. And at rank 25, while you are under the effect of Wreath of Lightning, you gain 25% increased movement speed. This is a very useful gem for speed farming Nephilim Rifts or low tier GRs, so that you can do your gem ups, stuff like that, because it gives you a massive boost to your movement speed. And it is also utilized for the Z Barbarians. Sometimes they like to move really fast, and Wreath of Lightning really helps with that. Plus it sends out those charged lightning bolts, which causes aggro and pulls monsters in. So other than that, I would not utilize this for any solo greater rift pushing, but it can be beneficial for farming and for ZDPS barbarians. Then we've got Marinate Airdrop of the Starweaver. Marinate is not all that useful, unfortunately. It sounds good in theory. You have a 15% chance on hit to smite a nearby enemy for a certain amount of weapon damage as holy, and heal yourself for 3% of your maximum life. And at rank 25, you smite a nearby enemy every 3 seconds. Unfortunately, this has a pretty decent internal cooldown, so you cannot just drop these smites all over the place, because there were a couple of builds, especially a certain Necromancer build, that was able to sustain itself in very high level GRs utilizing this gem, and they nerfed it down to where it has a pretty substantial internal cooldown, and for the most part is not used nowadays. Then we've got Moratorium. This gem also doesn't really have a place in the game currently. 35% of your damage taken is instead staggered and dealt to you over X amount of seconds. And at rank 25, 20% chance to clear all staggered damage. Sounds good in theory, but for the most part, this gem is not used and should not be used. Same with Invigorating Gemstone. Each hit done increases healing received by 1% for 5 seconds and stacks up to 10 times. And at rank 25, you are immune to control impairing effects. Now, another gem that in theory sounds really cool, but ultimately it does not do enough to warrant it being in any type of build. And then the last gem we're going to be talking about is Boon of the Hoarder. This can only be received from greed when you are running puzzle rings. If you put a puzzle ring into the cube, it opens up the vault and you can farm goblins in there and get this Boon of the Hoarder gem. Now this does have a 25% chance on killing an enemy to cause an explosion of gold, and at rank 25 you gain 30% increased movement speed for 2 seconds after picking up gold. Very useful in speed farming Nephilim Rifts. Not useful whatsoever in GRs because there is no gold drops, but in Nephilim Rifts, this can be very handy with helping you get around that rift, pick up your DBs, your gold, your drops, and kill the Rift Guardian, grab your keys, rinse and repeat. Especially if you combine this with something like the Avarice Band Ring and a gold wrap. This makes you pretty much invulnerable during those Nephilim Rifts and gives you a wide radius of picking up the extra gold. And that can allow you to farm up your gold quickly so you can utilize that gold to level up your gems. Which brings us to gem leveling. As you are running greater rifts, you can empower those rifts for a certain amount of gold, and this will give you an extra gem level. At the end of the rift, after killing the Rift Guardian, you are allowed to level up one of your gems. I strongly suggest when you are gem leveling to run greater rifts that you are capable of completing without deaths in 2 to 4 minutes. You want to go the highest you possibly can in that time frame safely so that you don't die, because you also get an extra gem level for every time you don't die during a greater rift. So that can give you up to 5 chances to level up your gem. And I would always start with leveling your main gems first. For instance, my build here utilizes Bane of the Trapped, Bane of the Stricken, and Zay's Stone of Vengeance. So those would be my primary choices for leveling up gems. I want to get those up there because those add a significant amount of damage to my build. And then once I've got those leveled up, I will focus on other gems for leveling so that I can use those gems to augment my gear. And as far as augmenting your legendary gear goes, you're going to want to pick the best pieces of legendary gear that you have to augment, because those are the pieces that are going to have the less likely chance of being replaced quickly. So you want to take your best ancient gear or primal ancient gear and throw augments on that. Now, what you're going to do for augmenting is you utilize the Caldeson's Despair Augment Ancient item. This is going to allow you to take a primal ancient or an ancient piece and augment it using a legendary gem. So we don't use our Teguk, so we can take this and we can use this to augment this primal ancient piece of gear. And we're going to want main stat. You're always going to want main stat. So our main stat is dexterity on a monk. So we're going to want to use Flawless Royal Emeralds. Now, I currently do not have 3 Flawless Royal Emeralds, let's say, but I really want to throw this gem onto this amulet and augment it with some dexterity. So what I can do here is take 9 of any gem and combine it with an Essence of Emerald. And you get essences from Squirt the Peddler here in Act 2. She sells all different kinds, and you can get whichever one you want and change this gem into emeralds. So what we're going to do right there is just throw these right into the cube, and there we go. And it converted them into 9 flawless emeralds. And then we're going to go ahead and take our Sunwuko Shine Primal Ancient Amulet, and we're going to throw our Teguk, which we do not use in any build, and 3 Flawless Royal Emeralds. And we can go ahead and transmute that. And now we have 535 dexterity added to this amulet because our Taeguk was rank 107. So now that does take away that gem. That gem is no longer there. The next time I run a Greater Rift, I will receive a Taeguk as a drop, and I will be able to start that process all over again. I personally level up gems while I'm gaining gear, but I don't actually throw it on a piece of gear until I know that it warrants being augmented. And that's pretty much up to you to decide whether that piece of gear is good enough for you to throw an augment on, or if that gem level is high enough for you to want to throw it onto that piece of gear. If you are struggling to advance yourself, maybe it's time to augment your gear. Especially when it comes to Greater Rift pushing, you can look at adding main stat to your ancient items, and that is going to help you out with your DPS substantially and allow you to clear more content. I would always augment your DPS gear first, and then look at maybe, if you have a ZDPS, maybe throw in some Vitality. The only time I would ever throw Vitality on anything is if it was on a ZDPS character, not a main DPS character. You want to use main stat for that because main stat is going to add a ton of damage, especially once you get all of your ancient items and you start augmenting them all with high-level legendary gem augments. It's going to be a great boon to your damage. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully this helps somebody out there because it's time for me to get back to the Diablo 3 basics videos. I have missed doing these videos. I do plan on doing more and more of these videos as we move forward because I think there's a lot of new players out there who could use a little bit of help, some tips, some tricks, etc. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please do that down below. Don't forget to hit that bell icon for notifications of when I put up new videos, and definitely let me know in that comment section down below what you think of this video. Don't forget to hit that like button, and you all have a fantastic day. Peace.